A crisp autumn breeze rustled through the leaves of Maplewood Park, painting the ground with a mosaic of amber, crimson, and gold. It was the kind of day that made you feel alive: clear skies, children's laughter echoing in the distance, and families enjoying the last whispers of warmth before winter's chill set in. But amid the idyllic scene, a shadow of danger was about to unfold. What happened next would be remembered by everyone who bore witness, and by the world beyond. On the southern side of the park, near the playground, a young mother named Clara sat on a bench, engrossed in a conversation with another parent. Her 4-year-old son, Jamie, toddled nearby, chasing a butterfly with giggles that melted hearts. Watching over them was Max, their golden retriever, a 6-year-old with a heart as golden as his fur. Max wasn't just a pet, he was family. Clara often joked that Max had more protective instincts than a bodyguard and more loyalty than anyone she'd ever known. Little did she know, Max was about to prove her right, in a way no one could have predicted. As the butterfly flitted farther from the playground, Jamie followed, his tiny feet stumbling over roots and uneven patches of grass. Max, ever watchful, stayed just a step behind, his ears perked and his soft eyes fixed on the boy. The two were inseparable, their bond forged through countless hours of shared adventures and quiet moments of comfort. Max had been there for Jamie's first steps, his first scraped knee, and every bedtime story told under the glow of a nightlight. And today, Max's unwavering presence would become Jamie's greatest shield. It happened in an instant. A man, dressed in nondescript clothes, his cap pulled low over his face, appeared at the edge of the park. At first, he seemed to blend in, just another passerby enjoying the day. But as he scanned the playground, his gaze lingered too long on Jamie. His movements were deliberate yet cautious, as if calculating every step. Max's body stiffened. He didn't bark or growl, he simply froze, his eyes narrowing as he watched the stranger. Something wasn't right. Clara was still deep in conversation, unaware of the danger that was quietly closing in. And Jamie, oblivious to the man's presence, had now wandered closer to the park's edge, his butterfly chase leading him toward a secluded path. The man moved closer, his steps silent but purposeful. He glanced around, ensuring no one was paying attention. His target was clear. In moments like these, instincts take over, and Max's instincts were razor-sharp. As the man reached for Jamie, Max sprang into action. With a speed and ferocity no one would have expected from the usually gentle dog, Max lunged forward, positioning himself between Jamie and the stranger. A deep, guttural growl erupted from his chest, a sound that sent shivers down the spine. The man hesitated, startled by Max's sudden aggression, but he didn't back away. Instead, he reached for Jamie again, his desperation outweighing his fear. Max barked sharply, the sound piercing through the park's usual hum of activity. Heads turned, and Clara's heart sank as she saw her son's precarious situation. Panic surged through her, but Max was already acting as Jamie's shield, his body a wall of fur and muscle. The man, realizing his window of opportunity was closing, tried to push past the dog. But Max wouldn't budge. He snapped at the man's hand, forcing him to stumble backward. The commotion drew the attention of nearby parkgoers. A jogger shouted, "Hey, what's going on?" A father rushed over, phone in hand, ready to call for help. The man, now cornered by Max's unrelenting defense and the gathering crowd, made a split-second decision. He turned and ran, disappearing into the woods that bordered the park. Clara sprinted to Jamie, scooping him up and clutching him tightly to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt beside Max, who was still standing guard, his eyes fixed on the path where the man had fled. She wrapped her arms around the dog, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Thank you, Max. Thank you." The park buzzed with activity as people gathered to ensure Clara and Jamie were okay. The police were called, and witnesses gave their accounts of what had happened. Max, now calm but still alert, stayed by Jamie's side, his tail wagging gently as if to reassure the boy that everything was all right. But for Clara, the gravity of the situation was just sinking in. Max hadn't just been a loyal companion, he had been a hero. And as she looked into his soulful eyes, she realized this moment was only the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. Max wasn't just any dog. He had a story of his own, one that shaped him into the brave soul who stood between Jamie and danger that day. 6 years earlier, Max had been a stray, wandering the streets of a busy city. Malnourished and skittish, he trusted no one. His golden fur, once shiny, had become matted and dull, and his ribs were visible beneath his coat. People walked past him every day without a second glance, each lost in their own world, too preoccupied to care for an animal that seemed beyond saving. It wasn't always like that, though. There had been a time when Max had a family, a warm home and a person who loved him. But life had dealt him a cruel hand, and one day, he found himself alone. His owners had moved away without him, abandoning him on the streets without even a second thought. For months, Max struggled to survive, scavenging for food and avoiding other animals and people. He was always on edge, never knowing when the next moment of kindness would come, or when danger would strike. But fate had a different plan for Max. One rainy evening, as the wind howled through the city's dark alleyways, Clara, a college student volunteering at a local animal shelter, noticed him huddled against the side of a building. His yellow eyes shone through the rain, weary but alert. Clara wasn't sure why she approached him, perhaps it was the way he looked at her, or the way his body trembled from both cold and fear. Whatever it was, something inside her clicked. She crouched down and softly spoke, offering him the last of the sandwich she'd been eating. At first, Max hesitated. He was so used to being abandoned, used to people who walked by him without a care, that he didn't believe this woman would offer him anything but more disappointment. But there was something different about Clara. With gentle words, she coaxed him forward, her calm demeanor slowly breaking through his defenses. Days turned into weeks, and Clara visited Max every day after her classes. Slowly, he began to trust her. His fur grew softer, his eyes brighter. He would wag his tail when she arrived, and he began following her home after their time together. Max had never known love in the way he was learning to now, but Clara had become his anchor in a world that had once been filled with only uncertainty. When Clara adopted Max, it was a new beginning for them both. For Max, the days of loneliness and hunger were behind him, replaced with the warmth of a home filled with care and compassion. And for Clara, Max was more than just a dog, he was a friend, a partner, and a protector. She often marveled at how the dog who had once been so scared of everything now walked through life with quiet confidence, always by her side, always looking out for her and the ones she loved. The connection between Clara and Max grew as time passed, and when Jamie came into the world, it was as though their family was finally complete. Max's protective instincts kicked in immediately. From Jamie's first day home, Max was there, his golden coat shimmering in the soft light of the nursery, watching over the baby as if he had always known he was meant to be a guardian. Max was present at every milestone, Jamie's first steps, his first words, the first time he scraped his knee while running across the yard. Max was never far behind, always there to comfort Jamie with a nudge or a lick, his calm presence offering reassurance in moments of fear or pain. But as with all things in life, it wasn't always perfect. Clara's marriage had ended when Jamie was still young, and the responsibility of raising her son on her own had taken a toll on her. She often felt like she was balancing on the edge of exhaustion, trying to juggle her job, Jamie's needs, and the responsibilities of life. It was during those quiet, late nights when Clara would feel overwhelmed that Max would curl up beside her, his body warm against her legs. He didn't need to speak, his presence was enough to remind her that she wasn't alone. In return, Clara took care of Max with the same devotion. She made sure he had the best food, regular trips to the vet, and more belly rubs than he could count. She had come to rely on him as much as he had come to rely on her. They were a team, a family that had been built on trust and love, two souls who had found one another when the world seemed too big to handle alone. But on that fateful day in the park, when the stranger had approached Jamie, the bond between Clara, Jamie, and Max would be tested in ways that none of them could have imagined. Max, who had always been the silent protector, would have to act on instincts that had been honed over the years. And in that moment, the love they shared would become a shield, a barrier that stood between danger and the ones they cherished most. The days following the park incident felt like a whirlwind. Max had been hailed as a hero, his story spreading like wildfire across the community. Neighbors, strangers, and local news outlets all wanted to meet the courageous dog who had saved a child from a kidnapping attempt in broad daylight. Clara tried to appreciate the praise, but underneath it all, she was shaken. The reality of what had almost happened kept replaying in her mind, like a haunting echo she couldn't shake. Despite Max's incredible bravery, there was one fact that Clara couldn't ignore: the man who had attempted to take Jamie was still out there. In the days that followed, Clara's routine shifted. She became hypervigilant, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings for any sign of danger. The once peaceful walks in the park, where Clara could let the stress of the day melt away, now felt like a calculated risk. Jamie, ever the curious and trusting boy, noticed his mother's change in behavior. The fun and carefree trips they used to take became tense, overshadowed by the weight of fear. Max, ever the protector, seemed to sense this unease. He stayed close to Jamie at all times, his eyes constantly scanning, his ears always perked. Whether they were at the grocery store, walking to the car, or playing in the backyard, Max was there, guarding, watching, and protecting. It was as if the bond between them had solidified into something deeper, more instinctual. But Clara wasn't the only one struggling with the aftermath. Jamie, too, had changed in subtle but noticeable ways. The boy who had once loved to run ahead, chasing after every butterfly or bird, now stayed close to Max, clutching onto the dog's fur whenever they ventured outside. He had become unusually quiet, his once carefree laughter replaced by moments of apprehension, as if the memory of that terrifying day in the park had marked him in ways Clara couldn't understand. One afternoon, Clara took Jamie to the local coffee shop for a treat, hoping to lift his spirits. Max came along, as always, and sat at Jamie's feet under the table. The bustling cafe, with its warm lights and the hum of conversation, felt like the perfect place to relax. But as Clara sipped her coffee, she noticed a man sitting at the table across from them. His face was familiar. It was the same man who had tried to grab Jamie in the park. Clara's heart stopped. She had seen enough of his face in the police sketches to know for sure. The same cap, the same worn jacket, the same cold eyes. Panic surged through her, and she fought to keep her breathing steady. The man hadn't seen them yet, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was closer than ever. Max, sensing her unease, raised his head from Jamie's lap. His eyes locked onto the man across the room, and his posture stiffened. The once relaxed golden retriever now stood at attention, his muscles taut, his gaze unwavering. Clara's mind raced. Should she say something? Should she call the police? But her thoughts were interrupted when the man stood up, glancing briefly in their direction before walking out of the cafe. Clara waited for what felt like an eternity before she dared to exhale. She was certain it was him. The man who had tried to take Jamie was still out there, and now, he was getting bolder. The feeling of safety she had tried to regain was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her protective instincts were on high alert. Every strange face now felt like a potential threat. Every shadow in the corner of her eye made her freeze in fear. What if the man was watching them right now? What if he came back for revenge? Max, however, remained calm, his steady gaze never leaving the door the man had exited through. He seemed to know something that Clara didn't, something instinctual that kept him from panicking. It was as if Max had taken on the role of not just a protector of Jamie, but of Clara herself. And it was this unspoken understanding, this quiet bravery, that gave her the strength to face the situation head-on. But as the days passed, Clara's unease deepened. The community's support was comforting, but it wasn't enough to erase the reality of what they were facing. The police investigation had hit a dead end. The man had left no clear trace of his identity, and the lead witnesses couldn't provide anything more than vague descriptions. For Clara, every unanswered question was like a crack in the foundation of her peace of mind. Max's training was becoming more important than ever. Clara had decided to enroll him in an advanced obedience class, hoping to sharpen his skills and give herself a sense of control. The classes were intense, but Max thrived, responding to commands with precision and confidence. At first, Clara had only seen these lessons as a way to teach Max how to follow commands more effectively, but now, the stakes felt much higher. The world outside their home was no longer a safe, predictable place. And Clara knew that if the worst happened again, Max was their only line of defense. In one of the final lessons, the trainer had introduced a scenario where dogs were required to protect a vulnerable target in a controlled environment. The trainer played the role of a stranger, approaching Clara while she held a dummy that represented Jamie. Max was tasked with preventing the stranger from reaching Clara. Without hesitation, Max lunged forward, growling fiercely as he blocked the trainer's path. It was an instinctual display of his protective nature, a clear reminder of just how far he was willing to go for the ones he loved. And it was in that moment that Clara realized something she hadn't fully understood before. Max wasn't just her dog. He wasn't just Jamie's companion. He was their guardian angel, silent, steadfast, and ready to do whatever it took to keep them safe. But even with Max by her side, Clara couldn't help but feel like the clock was ticking. The fear that gripped her heart was not just about the man who had tried to kidnap Jamie, it was the constant uncertainty of when or if he would return. She couldn't live like this forever. But as long as Max was with them, there was hope. The weeks following the coffee shop encounter left Clara on edge. Every time she left the house, she felt like she was looking over her shoulder, wondering if the man might be watching from a distance. She couldn't help but feel like they were living in a constant state of limbo, caught between the terrifying reality of the attempted kidnapping and the quiet, false sense of security they tried to create in their home. But through it all, Max remained steady. His presence was a constant reassurance. At night, when Clara would lie awake, the sound of Max's rhythmic breathing next to her was a reminder that they were not alone in this. Max was more than a protector, he was a bridge between fear and safety. And as much as Clara hated feeling anxious, she knew that as long as Max was by her side, there was hope. There was always hope. It wasn't just Clara who was affected by the events at the park. Jamie, too, had been struggling in ways that Clara couldn't fully understand. The boy who used to run around the yard with endless energy now stayed closer to home. His laughter, once a soundtrack to their everyday life, had become a rare sound, replaced by long silences that tugged at Clara's heart. One afternoon, after a long, quiet day, Clara and Jamie sat on the porch swing together. The air was warm, the sky a brilliant blue, but there was an undeniable heaviness between them. Max lay at their feet, watching over them as always. Clara glanced down at Jamie, noticing the way his small hands gripped the edge of the swing, his legs crossed tightly beneath him. "Jamie," Clara began softly, her voice tender, "do you want to talk about it? About the park?" Jamie shook his head, his eyes downcast. He didn't say anything at first, but Clara could feel his walls rising higher. She didn't push, knowing that when he was ready, he would talk. She simply sat beside him, offering her presence as a quiet reassurance that everything would be okay, even if it didn't feel like it right now. After a long pause, Jamie spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, what if the man comes back?" Clara's heart ached at the question. Her own fears had become his. She wrapped her arm around him, pulling him close. "We'll be ready, Jamie. Max will always protect us. And no matter what, I'm here. We're a team, remember?" Jamie nodded but didn't seem convinced. Clara knew that fear wasn't something you could simply talk away. It would take time for Jamie to heal, to regain his confidence, to trust the world around him again. Later that week, Clara made a decision. She had spent so many days caught in a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty, and though she had relied on Max's courage, she realized she hadn't fully taken charge of her own. It was time for change. She couldn't allow the fear to continue shaping their lives. Max had been trained in obedience and protection, but Clara had never pushed herself to train in the ways she knew she could. She needed to regain control of the situation, to empower herself and her family. So, she signed them up for a self-defense class. It was a bold step, one that went against the grain of her usual approach of avoiding confrontation. But something had shifted inside Clara. She could no longer live in constant fear. She would fight back if it came to that. The first few lessons were humbling. Clara struggled with some of the basic moves, feeling awkward and out of place. But Max's steady presence was a reminder that she could do this. When she felt unsure, she would glance at him, his calm eyes watching her as if to say, "I believe in you." It was this quiet encouragement that pushed Clara to keep going, even when the moves felt difficult or unnatural. In those classes, she not only learned how to defend herself, but also how to channel her fear into something productive. It wasn't about becoming a fighter, it was about taking back the power she had lost. Every time she practiced a new technique, she felt a little more like herself, stronger, more capable, less afraid. But it wasn't just the self-defense training that helped Clara regain her confidence. It was seeing Jamie slowly begin to open up again. One evening, after dinner, Jamie had come to her with a small, worried look on his face. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," Clara replied, setting her cup of tea down. Jamie hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you think I could go back to the park? I mean, with Max?" Clara's heart swelled with emotion. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. "We can, Jamie. Whenever you're ready, we can go back. And Max will be right there with us." Jamie smiled a little, a flicker of the old light returning to his eyes. It wasn't the carefree joy of before, but it was progress. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt a small spark of hope ignite inside her. They weren't healed yet, but they were moving in the right direction. It was in that moment, sitting across from Jamie on the porch swing, that Clara realized just how much she had changed. The fear still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. The man who had tried to take Jamie might still be out there, but Clara and Max weren't the same people they had been before. They had transformed. They had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the strength to move forward in spite of it. The weeks following Clara's decision to face her fears had brought an air of tentative peace. She, Jamie, and Max had resumed their normal activities, although they were still marked by caution. Clara's self-defense training had strengthened her sense of security, and Jamie had slowly started to regain the sense of safety he had lost. Max, ever the sentinel, remained ever present, always with his protective stance, yet his demeanor had softened in these moments of quieter strength. It was as if the dog had come to realize that the worst of the storm had passed, at least for now. But even in this newfound peace, Clara could feel the tension building. It wasn't just the haunting thought of the man who had tried to kidnap Jamie, it was the unsettling feeling that something bigger, something more dangerous, was still waiting on the horizon. It wasn't a matter of if the man would come back, but when. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, a gnawing sensation that had clung to her, despite all her attempts to move forward. That feeling was her warning, her instinct. The peace she had fought for felt fragile, and deep down, she knew it wouldn't last forever. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Clara had been running errands, Jamie by her side, and Max walking obediently beside them. It was a typical weekday, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street as they made their way back to the car. The sound of traffic, the hum of everyday life, was in the background, but Clara was focused on Jamie, who was happily chatting away about the book he was reading for school. Max, ever the vigilant protector, walked on the other side of her, occasionally glancing up at her to make sure everything was okay. But then, Clara saw him. It happened in an instant, a flash of movement from across the street. His face was unmistakable. The same cold eyes, the same dark jacket, the same cap pulled low over his forehead. The hairs on the back of Clara's neck stood on end. He was watching them. Max must have sensed it, too. His posture stiffened, his steps slowed, and his head snapped to attention, his gaze locked on the man across the street. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Without thinking, Clara reached down and gripped Jamie's hand tightly. Max's eyes never left the stranger, his whole body taut with warning. The man hadn't moved yet, but Clara knew that the danger was real. It was now. Jamie, Clara whispered urgently, her voice steady but firm, we need to get to the car. Now. Jamie's eyes widened with confusion, but he didn't argue. Clara gently but firmly guided him toward the car, her body instinctively positioning herself between Jamie and the man. Max was already ahead, his body low and ready to protect. The urgency in Clara's movements was obvious now, every step was calculated, every glance a warning. The man, noticing their sudden movement, took a step forward. His intentions were clear. He wasn't just watching them anymore, he was coming closer. Every muscle in Clara's body tensed. She could feel the panic rising, but she fought to stay calm. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. Clara, get in the car, Jamie urged, sensing his mother's growing anxiety. His words shook her back to the present. Clara pulled the car door open and quickly ushered Jamie inside, her eyes never leaving the man. Max stood between them and the stranger, his eyes locked on the man's every move. Clara's hands were shaking as she slammed the door shut and locked it, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. She started the engine, but the man wasn't backing down. He was still moving toward them. Clara's heart raced as she threw the car into reverse, her foot pressing the pedal harder than she intended. The tires squealed as the car jerked backward, narrowly avoiding the approaching man. He reached out, trying to grab the door handle, but Max lunged forward in the nick of time, biting down on the stranger's arm. A low growl escaped Max's throat, loud, fierce, primal. He wasn't backing down. Clara didn't hesitate. She hit the gas, slamming the car into drive and speeding down the road, away from the park where it all began. The man didn't pursue, but Clara didn't slow down. Her eyes scanned the rearview mirror as they drove away, half expecting the man to follow. But he didn't. She didn't feel safe until they had reached their neighborhood, but even then, the tension didn't dissipate. Max was panting heavily, his body trembling with adrenaline, but his eyes remained alert. He knew something had changed, and he was ready for whatever came next. That was him, Clara whispered, more to herself than to Jamie. That was him. Jamie, still shaken, nodded quietly from the back seat, his eyes wide with fear. Max remained calm, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. It wasn't until they were safely inside their house, the door locked and the blinds drawn, that Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Max stayed close to Jamie, not leaving his side. The danger had been real, more real than Clara had allowed herself to believe. And yet, in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, certainty. The man might have been watching them again, but Max had made sure he didn't get any closer. Clara knew the fight wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. The night was eerily quiet. After their close call on the street, Clara, Jamie, and Max had spent hours locked inside their home, processing what had just happened. Clara had called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, the man was long gone, leaving behind only a trail of questions and unease. Clara tried to keep calm in front of Jamie, but her mind was racing. The fear that had crept back into her heart felt all-encompassing. But as the night wore on, Clara found herself pacing the living room, her mind a swirl of confusion and anger. She couldn't let this man terrorize them any longer. He had already tried to take Jamie once, and now he was watching them, following them, threatening their safety once again. Max, as always, was right beside her. The dog's steady presence was the only thing keeping Clara grounded in this moment of pure chaos. His eyes were fixed on her, as if he, too, understood the stakes. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. This was a battle for their lives. And Max wasn't about to let anyone harm the ones he loved. Clara glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. Jamie had long since fallen asleep, his small, tired body curled up on the couch. Max lay by his side, a silent guardian keeping watch. Clara felt a deep ache in her chest. Her son had been through so much, and she couldn't bear the thought of him living in fear. She would protect him. She had to. The phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from the police. We've reviewed the footage from the nearby cameras. We've identified the man. We'll be keeping an eye out. But we still need your help. If you see him again, don't hesitate to call us. Clara's heart sank. The man had a face now. He wasn't just some faceless threat anymore. He was real. A real, dangerous person who was still out there, still coming after them. But that wasn't enough. Clara knew they couldn't just wait for the police to take action. She wasn't going to sit by while this man terrorized her family. The feeling of helplessness that had plagued her for so long was suddenly replaced by a fiery resolve. She couldn't just wait for the danger to come to her doorstep. She had to take control. She turned to Max, her loyal companion, who had been by her side through every dark moment. Max, Clara whispered softly, her voice full of determination. We're going to end this. Together. Max's ears perked up, his eyes focused on her. He knew. He always knew. Clara moved to the kitchen, pulled out her phone, and began scrolling through the contacts. She stopped at the name of the self-defense instructor who had taught her the techniques she'd been practicing for weeks. He had always been supportive, always stressed the importance of readiness and preparation. But now, she needed more than just training. She needed a plan. She needed someone to help her take this fight to the next level. The phone rang once, twice, and then he answered. Clara, is everything okay? His voice was concerned. Clara could barely hear the tremble in her own voice as she spoke. I need your help, she said, her words steady but full of urgency. There's a man. He's been following us. I need to know how to stop him. I need to protect my family. The instructor's response was swift and assured. You're not alone in this, Clara. We'll work through it. You've trained for this. Let's make sure you're ready to protect yourself and your son. The call ended, and Clara felt a slight weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone. She had Max. She had her training. And now, she had a plan. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she spent the early hours of the morning reviewing every detail of the previous encounters, thinking through every possible scenario. She went over the self-defense techniques she had learned, mentally rehearsing the moves she would need to make. But it wasn't just about physical preparedness. Clara knew that the key to surviving what was coming would be her mindset. She had to be mentally ready to do whatever it took to protect Jamie and Max. By the time the sun rose, Clara had made up her mind. She wouldn't wait for the police anymore. She wasn't going to let this man lurk in the shadows, waiting for his next opportunity. She would face him head-on. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Clara worked closely with the instructor, refining her techniques, running through simulations, and learning how to read every situation. Max, ever the dedicated partner, was with her every step of the way. He had become a silent but unshakable presence, reminding Clara that she wasn't fighting this alone. But no matter how much she trained, the fear still lingered. Every time she stepped outside, her eyes would scan the surroundings, her mind on high alert. Every person who crossed their path became a potential threat, and every rustle of leaves in the wind made her flinch. Clara had learned a lot about herself in the past few weeks, about her strength, her resilience, her unwavering love for her son, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment that was about to come. It was an ordinary afternoon when it happened. Clara and Jamie were in the park again. Max was walking beside them, as always, his posture a little more alert, his senses honed to the environment around him. Clara had chosen the park for a reason. It was the place where everything had started, and it was the place where she would end it. The park was quiet, almost too quiet. Clara could hear the soft rustling of the trees in the breeze, the distant sound of children laughing, and the rhythm of Max's paws on the gravel path. But there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a palpable sense of something being just out of reach. It felt like the calm before the storm, but Clara wasn't waiting for it anymore. She was ready. And then she saw him. He was standing at the far end of the park, leaning against a tree, watching them with those same cold eyes. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the clarity of purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was ready to fight back. "Jamie, stay close," Clara said quietly, her voice firm. Max's ears pricked up, and he immediately moved to stand between Clara and the man. He had sensed the danger before Clara had fully processed it. Clara's heart raced, but she took a deep breath, grounding herself in the moment. This was it. There was no turning back now. The park felt suffocatingly still. Every sound, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds, seemed muted by the weight of the moment. Clara's breath was steady, but her heart thundered in her chest. Max stood firm between her and the man, his body taut with readiness. Clara could feel the heat of her own fear, but it no longer controlled her. It had transformed into something else, something fierce and resolute. The man was closer now, his eyes narrowing as he took a step toward them. Clara's mind raced through all the possible outcomes, all the things she had prepared for. She could feel Max's protective energy, his unwavering loyalty pushing her to stay strong. But this time, the outcome would not be left to chance. It was up to her now. "Stay behind me, Jamie," Clara whispered, the command sharp but gentle. Her eyes met her son's, and for the first time in weeks, she saw something different in his gaze, an unspoken understanding, a sense of trust. The man halted, just a few paces away. His stance was menacing, but Clara stood taller. Every training session, every painful step she had taken to reclaim her strength, was leading to this very moment. "Clara," the man said, his voice cold, almost amused. "You really think you can stop me? You can't protect him forever." The words struck like ice, but Clara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, eyes locked on his. "I will protect him. You're not getting anywhere near my son. Not now, not ever." Max growled low, a deep rumble from deep within his chest, sending a wave of warning through the air. The man looked at the dog, a flicker of recognition flashing across his face, but he didn't retreat. If anything, he seemed emboldened. Clara's hand instinctively went to her side, where a small, but vital tool, the pepper spray, was tucked inside her jacket pocket. It was her final line of defense, and she knew it wasn't just for the physical confrontation. It was a symbol of everything she had learned, of the strength she had rediscovered, of the woman she had become. But as the man took another step forward, Max moved first. The dog surged forward with such speed and precision that Clara barely had time to react. He closed the gap between them, his powerful form launching at the man with unrelenting force. In an instant, Max's teeth sank into the man's arm, his growl so fierce it seemed to shake the air itself. The man staggered back, a cry of shock and pain escaping his lips as he tried to free himself. Clara didn't hesitate. She moved with purpose, her body trained and ready. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the pepper spray, and in one swift motion, aimed it directly at the man's face. The spray hit with a sharp hiss, and the man recoiled, coughing and gagging as the burning mist stung his eyes. The world seemed to slow down as the man staggered back, blinded and disoriented. Clara didn't wait. She pulled Jamie close, her arm around him protectively, guiding him away from the danger. Max, still on the offensive, released his grip on the man's arm but didn't let up. He stood guard, his eyes never leaving the stranger, making sure he wouldn't move any closer. The man was now stumbling backward, wiping at his eyes, his body trembling with rage. His words came out in a hiss, full of venom and fury. "This isn't over," he spat, but Clara didn't wait for him to say more. She was already pulling Jamie into a swift, controlled retreat, her eyes locked on the path ahead. Max walked beside them, ever vigilant, every step in sync with Clara's pace. As they reached the entrance to the park, Clara turned back for a moment, just in time to see the man stumble off into the trees, his figure retreating into the shadows. He was beaten, broken, not physically, perhaps, but his will had shattered. Clara and Jamie didn't stop until they were back in their car, the engine roaring to life as they sped away from the park, from the danger, from everything that had tried to tear them apart. But even as they drove, Clara knew that something had changed. The terror they had faced that day hadn't just been a fight for survival, it had been a fight for their futures, for their peace of mind, for the sanctity of their bond. They were free now. And though the scars would remain, they were a reminder of their resilience, of their strength. As they pulled into the driveway, Jamie let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He looked up at Clara with an expression she hadn't seen in him for so long, something like relief, like he was finally able to breathe again. "We did it, Mom," he said, his voice soft but filled with awe. "We really did it." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "Yes, we did." Max jumped out of the car the moment the door opened, his tail wagging, as though he, too, was celebrating the victory. Clara kneeled down to greet him, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck in a moment of profound gratitude. "You saved us, buddy. I'll never be able to thank you enough." Max licked her face affectionately, as though to say, "It's what I do. It's what I'm here for." That night, as Clara sat on the couch with Jamie tucked under her arm, Max curled up at their feet, she finally allowed herself to relax. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a peace settling over her, a peace that was hard-won and well-deserved. She looked down at Jamie, his small body leaning against her, his eyes slowly fluttering closed in exhaustion. She kissed the top of his head, whispering a quiet promise to him. "I will always protect you, Jamie, no matter what." Max's deep, steady breathing was the perfect soundtrack to their quiet night, a reminder that they had survived this together, that, in the face of everything, they had found a way to heal, to overcome. As Clara sat there, the quiet of the evening wrapping around her like a warm blanket, a sense of reflection began to settle in. The battle was over. But the journey, her journey, was far from finished. The man was gone, for now. The immediate danger had passed, but Clara knew deep down that the fear would never truly disappear. It was the kind of fear that leaves a mark on your soul, that lingers even when the danger has passed. But it was also the kind of fear that, when faced head-on, becomes a reminder of what you're truly capable of. She had faced the worst of her fears and come out the other side stronger, not just as a mother but as a person. And it wasn't just the physical victory that mattered, it was the mental and emotional strength she had gained in the process. She had fought for her son. She had fought for Max. She had fought for her peace of mind. And in doing so, she had found a deeper connection to herself, to the things that truly mattered. As Max lay at her feet, his rhythmic breathing filling the room, Clara couldn't help but marvel at the bond they shared. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a confidant, a constant in a world that had so often seemed chaotic and unpredictable. He had been there through the darkest moments, and it was his loyalty, his unwavering presence, that had been the steady light in the storm. Jamie, now asleep beside her, was a constant reminder of why she fought. He was her heart, her reason for everything. And every step she had taken, every sacrifice she had made, was for him. Her love for him had been the catalyst for her transformation. It had driven her to become something more, something stronger. And in that strength, she had found not just protection, but healing. The journey they had been on together wasn't just about survival, it was about finding strength in unexpected places, about realizing that courage doesn't come from the absence of fear, but from moving forward in spite of it. It was about realizing that even in the darkest times, there is always hope, always a way forward. And for Clara, the greatest lesson of all had been that the love and loyalty shared between a mother and her child, and between a person and their dog, is a bond that nothing, no man, no fear, no darkness, can break. It is a bond that carries you through the impossible. It is a bond that lifts you when you feel like you can't stand, that pushes you forward when you feel like you might break. It is unshakable. As Clara sat there, with her son sleeping soundly and her loyal dog at her side, she understood something deep within herself. They had faced the storm together. They had come out stronger, more united, more whole. And they would face whatever came next the same way, together. If this story has inspired you, reminded you of the extraordinary bonds we share with the animals in our lives, or moved you with its message of strength, resilience, and courage, I invite you to be part of something bigger. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful, heartwarming story. We have more incredible tales of bravery, love, and inspiration coming your way. Comment below and share your own story. Have you ever witnessed an act of loyalty or bravery from an animal? We'd love to hear how your furry friends have made an impact on your life. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little extra inspiration today. Because sometimes, all we need is a reminder of the power of love and loyalty to change our perspective and our world.